Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Schneerson of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Welcome back to our special series on prayer in honor of the month of Elul, based on Kuntres Hatefilla, the Tract on prayer by the Rebbe Rashab. And today we're going to be focusing on chapter 6. And today's chapter is really interesting in the sense that it's sort of going to take us a little bit deeper from where we've been going so far. So just to give a little bit of a recap, really in very brief, I'll try to keep it super brief. We're trying to understand how to connect better in prayer, how to have a deeper experience of praying. We've spoken about the idea of the purpose of prayer and how the purpose of prayer is really to attach ourselves to God in a really essential kind of way, to the point that like we don't exist as anything apart from Him, and we feel that, we feel this really deep connection to Him and this deep cleaving to God, and how the ultimate purpose of that is actually for transformation of the self. So the question is, how do we get there? And we've learned that really this process of praying in a deep way involves some kind of meditation, which we're really trying to understand, what that means exactly. We know that it is an emotional experience. It's something that's felt in the heart. However, we also know that it's not something that's like generated by our emotions, like meaning to say it's not something that we can like hype ourselves up to feel. And the Rebbe Rashab explained to us how if somebody who tries to do this is actually a false experience. Somebody might think like while they're praying, they start to kind of make themselves cry or make themselves feel in certain ways, kind of try to get themselves like hyped up or into a certain mood. This is not correct, but rather, perhaps paradoxically speaking, the origin point, the place that we want to start from is in the mind. Because the mind, as we learn in Tanya and elsewhere in Chassidus, the mind actually is by nature rules over the heart, which means that it has potential to lead the heart in the right direction. If we think the right thoughts, this can actually stimulate our heart and our emotions to feel a certain way. Now, what this does not mean is it doesn't mean that we should try to come up with different innovative ideas while we're praying and different interpretations of the prayer. The Rebbe Rashab again said this is just like a false illusion if we do this kind of thing, but rather what we want to do is we want to get into a more receptive place, into a more like what I think of as like beginner's mind space, where we actually learn. We learn Chassidus, we learn about godly ideas, and through learning about these godly ideas, and through really focusing on them and meditating upon them, contemplating them, this can actually lead us to a state of feeling emotional about them. Initially in an intellectual way, where we're going to experience like a kind of like feeling of emotions within our minds, which actually exists. We talked about this idea of das in the previous episode. That was the focus of the previous episode, was this intellectual faculty known as das, which is actually described as being the feeler of the intellectual attributes. And then that Das, actually, not only is it the feeler of the intellectual attributes, but it's the connector to the emotions, so that it will actually draw down the this feeling into our hearts. Now, today, we're actually going to get into this in a little bit more of a detailed way, in a little bit more of a nuanced way, we could say, where one might think that thus the way to go about this is to learn Chassidus, right? Which, yes, that's what we're supposed to do. And then think about this Chassidus that they're learning. And at some point in the learning of the Chassidus, hopefully they're going to get excited about the ideas that they're learning. So perhaps you have had this experience. I definitely know that I've had this experience of, sometimes, learning Chassidus, learning these topics, they're really fascinating, just from a purely intellectual perspective. Like when you start learning about the spheros, when you start learning about the different worlds, when you start learning about, the correspondence of different things, the different elements of creation, all kinds of things like that. Like it's really fascinating to learn these things, and learning these topics can create an excitement, like you're learning these topics and let's say, maybe you didn't understand it initially. And then you suddenly understand what you were learning. And you're like, oh, wow, that's amazing. And then you start to get really excited about it. So the Rebbe Rashab here is going to be really demanding this, we could say, where he's going to tell us that excitement that we get about these ideas is actually not what he's hoping for and not what he's proposing. Yes, that could lead to a certain type of excitement, that you learn about a certain idea and you get excited about the idea. But staying in that place of being excited about the idea as an idea, we're missing an element. What's the element that we're missing? We're missing God. We're missing the idea. It's an interesting thing. We could be learning about all these godly concepts and yet forget in a certain way about the point, forget about why we're learning these things. Think about, secular academics. Like there are a lot of secular academics out there that study the Bible, that study the Talmud, and even many that study Kabbalah and Hasidus. There are Hasidic scholars, we could say, who are actually not practicing religiously right now, which is an interesting thing. And it goes to show us that just because you learn these ideas, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have the effect that they should have, which is making a person into a more God-fearing, God-loving, and, observant Jew. So that's what this chapter is about. This chapter is all about talking about, first of all, what we should not be focusing on, namely this idea of focusing on the concept for the concept's sake, and how it can be tricky because when we do focus on this intellectual concept, it actually could lead to a certain feeling of excitement. And we could feel like, oh, wow, I'm feeling excited. And that's what I'm looking for. I want to be excited when I pray, right? That's the goal. And the Rebbe Rashab is going to tell us, no, not really, because it's not really tapping into the essence of the concept, which is the godliness of the concept, which is actually going to have a much deeper effect on us and a much more real and it's going to permeate us in a more real way. So let's get into the text and see how the Rebbe Rashab describes this. And so once again, we're in chapter 6, and the Rebbe Rashab seems to love parentheses here. There's a lot of parentheses, and so he actually begins this chapter with a parentheses. And my understanding as to why this is a parentheses is because it sort of follows, everything that we've been talking about thus far, about this idea of, intellectual contemplation being the pathway to getting excited during prayer. And so now he's giving like a little caveat. And he says that, to clarify this idea, there's actually an excitement that's felt in the heart that comes just from the contemplation within the mind. And this happens. So how does a person get excited about through contemplating a concept? This is when the da'as, which is that feeling element within the mind, and also the connector within the mind, when this does not connect to the godliness of the concept, but rather to the concept itself. And thus what's happening here is that the essence of the godly light does not shine in a revealed way in his mind, in his brain, but just through the garments of understanding, meaning to say that, yes, he's learning about these ideas, and these ideas are inherently godly, but the godliness is not revealed within his mind. Rather, just the concepts themselves are revealed within his mind. And so now because of this, because the godliness within these concepts is not revealed, then these concepts nor this meditation do not have the power to spread forth and to be drawn down into the heart. So that the heart will also get excited with this meditation in the mind. So meaning to say that if a person stays in this level of contemplation of the concept itself and is just kind of like, ruminating upon the concept itself, the Rebbe Rashab is actually saying here that it's not even going to produce any kind of emotional experience at all. But So then what does create an emotional experience is then if a person kind of comes to like it's called a uvachen, like if a person kind of gets to this place of like, tapping into like the main point of, of what it is. So it's like, if you ever learn something and it's kind of like, there's like many different details of it all. And then there's like, the thesis of like you could sum it up in a thesis, like what is the thesis statement of this mimer or of the sikha? So if a person gets to that point, then, and then they realize that what is this point? The main point is going to be about the fact that godliness is good and great. So, this main point that godliness is great, this is going to cause him to feel something in his heart, right? However, this excitement about, this conclusion, this like thesis statement that he realized is not going to be an essential kind of excitement. So it's interesting what he's saying here, right? Because it's like the person is learning about godly ideas, and not only are they learning about godly ideas, but they actually get it. They get the idea that like the main point of what they're learning about is the fact that God is amazing and God is great. And this excites them. They feel they're like, wow, that's amazing. But even this level, the Rebbe Rashab is saying this is not the essential excitement that we're looking for. So why not? Because the heart itself is not feeling excitement about godliness, but rather we are causing an effect upon it so that it will feel something. Because this godly idea is not felt in his heart. It's still an intellectual idea. So yes, he figured it out intellectually. This is the main point of what the sikha or the mimer is trying to teach him. And then and he gets it, and then that causes him to feel something, but it's not like a really felt experience in a more in a really truly like internal way where it's coming from the heart itself. It's like sort of dependent on the mind is the way that I'm understanding this. And in parentheses here, another parentheses within the parentheses, the Rebbe Rashab says that not only that, this excitement is actually not going to be that deep, but rather it's just going to be an external kind of excitement. And it's going to be sort of like in the external aspects of the heart, what's known as the chitzoniut halev, because the heart has a pnimius, it has an inner aspect and it has an external aspect. So this is really this whole thing that we're talking about a person getting excited about a certain idea. Even if they recognize, that the main point is about how great God is, that's just an external. It's just going to affect the heart in an external manner. So basically, the Rebbe Rashab goes on and he says that there's a delay. There's a kind of hefsek, it's called in Hebrew, like a break between the excitement of the mind to the excitement of the heart. So after the person gets excited in their mind, then when they kind of like, take that excitement and they narrow it down and they kind of summarize it into the main point, then the heart gets excited about this. And when the person gets excited and feels this feeling in their heart, they're no longer even thinking about this contemplation that they were experiencing in their mind. And since they're no longer having this experience in their mind and they kind of forgot about what it is that they're excited about, then this is actually going to cause that this excitement in the heart is going to be small. It's going to be bekatnos, it's called in Hebrew. And the Rebbe Rashab says here again in another parentheses, he makes a distinction because we've used this word katnos before, this word smallness before. We said that when a person meditates in a more general way upon things, then the Rebbe Rashab had described that would lead to an experience of this kind of smallness. He says this is a different kind of smallness that he's talking about there. He says when a person just meditates upon things in a more general manner and they're not really like focusing, in a more detailed way, then it's really not there's not gonna be any kind of excitement within the emotions at all, but rather it's just gonna be like a false illusion. Like if somebody learns something in a kind of cursory way and then they start feeling excited about it, like again, I gave the example of like you go to hear an inspirational speaker and the speaker kind of hypes you up and everything, and you're kind of following and everything along, but you're not even necessarily concentrating too much on what they're saying, but you're kind of getting caught up in the moment of what they're saying and it sounds good to you. You might feel like you're getting excited about it, but that's actually like kind of like a false excitement, which is not called avoda at all. It's not called service at all, that type of excitement. Whereas here, it's a little bit different because here, there is a true excitement. It's not that the person's imagining that they're getting excited. They're really excited. They learned a concept and they really studied it in detail, and they even got to like the main points of the concept. They figured out like the main point, and the main point was something having to do with God. So that got them to feel excited about it. So it's a true feeling. It's not what we would call a false illusion here. So that's the difference. And we actually could call this a service of the heart out of love and fear, both in terms of loving God and fearing God in their own right, which are important attributes that we want to cultivate in their own right, and also love and fear as it relates to keeping mitzvahs, meaning to say that it's going to add a certain vitality to the keeping of mitzvahs. And so too in terms of refining the animal soul, which is what our goal is from prayer that we've spoken about. However, nevertheless, even though, yes, this is something that's considered to be service, the Rebbe Rashab does give it that. However, it's just in a way, generally speaking, it's just in a way of katnos and chitzonios. It's a small type of experience, and it's an external type of experience. Why? Because it doesn't radiate the godly light and the meditation in the heart that we've spoken about above, that we're really looking to cultivate. And because of this type of excitement is going to go away very quickly. It's not going to be lasting. And this is because in his mind, the godly light is not shining on an essential level, which is not the case when the connection in his mind is in the essence of godliness, of the godliness of the idea, and then the godly light will actually shine essentially in his mind. Even though, yes, it's going to be clothed in the garments of logic. So what's the difference is that the difference here is that in this case, in this second case that we're talking about, then the garments of logic are just kind of like a gateway, but rather the main thing that the person feels is not the idea, but it's actually the godly light. And so thus, because of this, then this godly light is going to be drawn down and it's going to spread out also into the heart, such that which he's feeling in his mind, namely, the godliness of this idea is going to be felt the same way that it is in his heart. And so, and then because of this, in this case, then the heart is going to get excited on its own about the essence of godliness. And so this is a more essential kind of excitement of the heart, which is getting excited on its own. So it's not like that it's just like kind of like feeding off of the mind and the it's an intellectual concept that's really exciting and then the heart kind of follows and gets excited. Rather, here, it's more of like, it's sort of like tapping into the inner excitement of the heart. Like through tapping into this essence of godliness within the mind, this actually causes the heart to tap into its own excitement. And this type of excitement is a much more lasting type of excitement that's much more sustainable because it's an essential type of excitement. It's not like a dependent kind of excitement. So that's the end of the first long parentheses. Now there's another parentheses here, and the Rebbe Rashab says that a person, after hearing about this might sound like pretty intense, right? Like it sounds like a lot. Like the Rebbe Rashab has a very high demand of all of us. He's very high expectation of what's required of us in terms of this service of God. And he says that a person should not say to themselves, "How am I even going to get to this? This sounds really difficult, really out of my reach." So the Rebbe Rashab says this type of thinking, this kind of defeatist mentality, comes from a place of not even trying, not even attempting to come to an authentic type of service. And it's through this thinking that it's very far from them and it's much more wondrous than them. And the Rebbe Rashab says that there's also, there's an admixture of the Yetzer Hara in there, like the evil inclination that doesn't want us to do this kind of service. So he brings in a certain amount of, like, a drop of bitterness coming from a place of falsehood, kind of basically a self-defeatist attitude, saying, like, you really think you can get to this place? This is way beyond your league. This is not something that you should be, trying to get to at all. So why waste your time, trying to get something that's totally unattainable? But in truth, this isn't something that's actually beyond our attainment. This isn't something that's far from us at all, but rather there's this principle that comes up in Tanya, and it's based on Torah. And here I want to actually say it in Hebrew because I think it's powerful, is that karov hadavar l'chol mi sheyesh lo moach velev. So this thing is actually very near to every person who has a brain and a heart, that they can actually deepen themselves to connect themselves to some type of concept in this way. And to not just connect themselves with the concepts, as we mentioned before, but rather they have the ability to connect themselves to the godly essence of the concept in their mind. And through God's chesed, through God's loving kindness, then this is something that he actually demands of everybody, of anybody who requests of God in a truthful way, to connect themselves with this strength. And through this is going to lead them to this feeling and to this excitement that we've been discussing, this true feeling, this true excitement, this lasting feeling, this lasting excitement in their minds and their heart. So it's true. This is actually going to require quite a bit of toil. It's going to require quite a bit of work. It's not something that's going to just happen on its own. So we do have to put some effort into it. However, it's not beyond a person at all. It's something that's totally attainable to every single one of us. So a person should not shy away from exerting their mind in this manner to really try to connect, to understand and to connect in this way that we've been describing. And now the Rebbe Rashab says here in another parenthesis, he says that actually, the striving of the mind, like exerting the mind, is actually a lot easier than exerting the heart. So, this idea that we described before of somebody trying to rouse themselves up into an emotional state, that's something that's a lot harder to do actually than using our mind and striving with our mind, like exerting effort in our minds. Because as is explained in Tanya, says the Rebbe Rashab, every person has agency over their mind. So we don't necessarily always have agency over how we feel. How we feel is something that's a little bit more like, it's just kind of something that happens to us. We kind of wake up and we're in a certain mood. We feel a certain way. We can influence this, but the feeling is just there, versus how we think is really something that we have a lot more control over. We can choose to focus on different ideas. We can choose to study different ideas. We can choose to exert effort in different ideas in an intellectual way. And this is something that every single one of us has the ability to do. And so that's why this process of service, this based on Chabad, this Chabad Chassidus that the foundation of Chabad Chassidus is using our mind, is where it's at. This is why it's so much more accessible to every single person. And again, the idea is to connect ourselves with the essential godliness of the idea that we've been talking about. And through this type of exertion, if a person really engages in this type of exertion, then the Rebbe Rashab says that it's actually going to be very easy for them to come to this place. As the famous saying goes, Yagata umatzata ta'amin. If you toiled and you found it, then you should believe. The origin of that statement, by the way, is from the Gemara in Masechet Megillah, page 6b. And so now, in conclusion, the Rebbe Rashab says that the takeaway advice here is that in order for it to be easy for him in tefillah, for a person in davening, in praying, is to engage in this type of meditation that we've been describing. And a person should accustom themselves to be engaged, to practice this iyun, this focus on an idea during the day. So meaning to say that a person, that the advice the Rebbe Rashab is giving here is that a person should actually take a certain time to isolate themselves, to go into solitude, and to really deepen their thoughts on a certain idea in Chassidus for 1 or 2 hours. And through doing this, if a person gets accustomed to this practice, then it's going to come to them easily during prayer to lengthen and deepen this type of meditation and the way that we've been describing, such that the light of godliness is going to radiate in his mind and in his heart, as we've been describing. And this is going to cause great salvations to his soul, as it will be explained further. And then in summation, so this is the summary here, at the little summary that's given at the end, is that we described here that there's an idea of an excitement of the heart that comes from the kind of takeaway concept of a certain topic that a person's learning. But this type of excitement is not deep, and it goes away very quickly. So, again, this is like he's talking about when a person gets excited about a certain concept, and even if the concept is a godly concept, they're getting excited about the concept. And so what's missing is that we want the actual essence of the light of godliness to shine in our minds, in our brains. And this comes through effort. And the advice for this is to accustom ourselves to learn, but with great focus, with great iyun, it's called in Hebrew. So that's the end of the chapter for today's episode. So just kind of in summation. So the basic idea, what we want to take away from here is that, yes, we want to learn Chassidus. Learning Chassidus is very valuable, and it's good to get excited about Chassidic ideas. These ideas are really interesting and really godly and holy in their own right. But we also want to take the time to really think about the meaning of these ideas in a real way. And we want to, if you have an hour or 2 hours, like the Rebbe Rashab was suggesting, that'd be amazing. I don't know if everybody has that time in their day to be able to do that. So even if you don't, try to take even just a few minutes a day to do this, or even when you're walking down the street, when you're washing the dishes, whatever it is. Think about something that you learned about and try to take it beyond just kind of trying to get the terms right, get the ideas right. Like a lot of times, whether it's you're learning Tanya or you're learning even what we're learning today, a lot of times it's like we want to just kind of like remember all the points. Like what were the main points that the Rebbe brought down in the Sikha? What were the main points that I learned in that class that I went to? We learned about the different levels of the soul. Maybe, we learned about the different spheros, whatever it is, these are all very godly and beautiful ideas, but sometimes we can actually fall into the trap of getting caught up in these concepts and getting caught up in the Chassidus itself, oddly enough, where we kind of really start thinking about the concepts as concepts and try to make a map of it all in our brain. And while there is a place for that, what we're talking about here in terms of preparing ourselves for prayer and in terms of deepening our experience of prayer is that we want to take this much deeper, and we want to actually think about these concepts in a deep way, in a real way, in a way that actually, that we feel the godliness within the concepts, that we get it. We get that these are real things. These aren't just, storybook ideas. It's sort of like, I guess, the difference between maybe reading a novel and reading the news, or even when you read about the news about something that happened in a faraway place versus if you read about something that happened in your country, in your city, in your neighborhood. What if it was something that happened to your neighbor next door, somebody in your building? It's going to affect you a lot more. And so the idea is really to think about these concepts in a way that these aren't just concepts. These are real things. When we learn Chassidus, we're talking about our lives. We're talking about ourselves. We're talking about God, our God. And so the more we think about this and the more we focus our meditation in this way, then this is going to lead us to where we need to go. And the Rebbe Rashab is telling us that it actually isn't that difficult. Yes, it requires effort, but it's something that's accessible to everybody. It's not some really ethereal, aspirational thing. It's something that every single one of us can do if we put in that work. So that's it for today. And we're going to continue next time when we go into chapter 7. So I will speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.